our Fireside Chat series. This is number 2. We first had Cheryl Grace 2 weeks ago from Nielsen, and I am Cheryl Grace, formerly powerfulpenny.com. Yes, indeed, y'all, we're having conversations about this book right here. No thanks. 7 ways to say, there we go. There we go. 7 ways to say, I'll just include myself, a guide to rockstar leadership for women of color in the workplace. Look, I am so excited because we're going to have a conversation which is really at the heart and soul of this book. And while there is a lot to say about understanding your value, digging into your story, and uncovering that value, and there's Dr. Jeff coming to his place. Um, there are some very real obstacles that women of color face, especially Black women. And this insight is backed by data that's been out since 2017 and reinforced year over year over year by the Women in the Workplace study done by McKinsey and Company and leanin.org. And then, of course, Catalyst has come behind them with even more data. And it's a real thing. So, of course, I've gotten credentialed as an executive coach, and my credentialing is also based in applied positive psychology. But I just wanted to let you know that I brought in the real deal for this book to back up some of the things we're saying. He's a clinical psychologist. You've seen him on Headline News. You've seen him on Basketball Wives. You've seen him on what? Real Housewives of what?
Atlanta, New York, Potomac. I love working with housewives.
Yeah. Well, they would seem to keep you busy, right?
Well, those are some fascinating ladies. And talk about leadership.
Yeah.
A lot of times we certainly, they're very underrated in the things that they're able to do and have done. But,
Yeah.
Michelle, you could have been one of those housewives if that's what you wanted to do. But you have, put out a path for yourself that has given you like incredible success that people really need to pay attention to.
Well, you're so sweet for saying that. I got to tell you, though, one of my friends is one of the new housewives of New York.
Yeah.
She's the first Black one ever, and her name is Ebony K. Williams.
Oh, yes.
A lot of you will know her. Yeah, from Revolt TV.
Yes.
She used to be a legal analyst on Fox. So shout out to Ebony, if she's out there, if her publicist Giselle is listening. What did you say, Dr. Jeff?
Yeah, I love me some Ebony. Don't get me started.
Yeah, Ebony. She's gorgeous, isn't she?
Well, it's the intellect. That's all I'm interested in.
Oh, yeah. Well, she's very smart, and her book, Pretty Powerful, is right behind me.
Yes.
Anybody whose book means something to me is behind me right now. So I could go into all of that. But Dr. Jeff, I got to thank you, first of all.
Oh, it is.
Thank you so much.
How many years have we known one another now? How many years has it been?
Oh, gosh. You know what? I probably met you around 2004.
Mm-hmm. I had.
Yeah. Through Sister to Sister magazine, Jamie Foster Brown.
Oh, I love me some Jamie.
I love Jamie, and I'm so glad she's rebooting.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome? Sister to Sister 2.0.
Recreating herself. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Listen,
I love it. Isn't that what we have to do now? Isn't that what we have to do now in this digital age?
Stay forever young, recreate. I mean,
yeah.
Look, I'm a senior citizen and I'm still around. But that's why I'm reading your book, No Thanks. And I'm telling you that this is something that's so important for women out there, but also for men too. There's so much great advice that we can use from it, helping us.
I'm so glad you said that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad you said that, because my first Goodreads review was made by a white woman. And I was so glad that it came from her. Not that we're centering her, when the book is about recentering ourselves, right? But she talks about how she learned so much about our plight, but then she also picked up nuggets for herself.
There you go.
And my premise is, if you can solve for Black women, you can solve for anybody.
Well, they're at the forefront, are they not?
Yeah, and you're not just saying that. Nielsen had some data out there.
Black Lives Matter,
Yes.
three fabulous women, two of them
Yeah.
queer women.
Yeah. You're right. You're
At
right.
the
And
forefront.
when a political party needs to move a needle, they need us to vote. And we usually pull it out for them.
And that's why we have Kamala Harris.
Yes. Oh my goodness. We are what, 4 or 5 days away from election. I don't know. I may need to sedate myself.
Well, it's really interesting. Let me tell you my quick story about Kamala Harris. I met
Yeah.
many years ago when I was in California doing something on domestic violence. And I got to introduce her as the keynote speaker at the time. And people don't remember
Wow.
this, but there was all of this stuff going around about, Kamala Harris, superstar attorney general. And they kept talking about her looks, how good
Mm.
she was, how good look. And I didn't go there, in
Yeah.
introduction. I talked about her intellect because,
Good.
of course, the most fascinating thing about her and her heritage, where she comes from, the
Yeah.
struggle, she's the next one, and so on.
Hmm.
But, and I think I may have mentioned something about future president, but I
Yeah.
remember people coming up to me later and saying, thank you for not talking about her appearance and only talking about the substance of her character.
Yeah.
And you know what I
That's
said?
awesome. Yeah. Stay out of some hot water. Well,
Well,
you know what? We're going to have a little commercial first, and then we're going to talk about this book. You ready?
right.
Okay. All righty.
Hmm.
We are back.
Yeah.
We are back.
It takes
And
a
you know
rock
what,
star leader. It
Dr.
takes
Jeff?
a rock star leader.
Yeah. You know what? It seems so appropriate to name it that because the people that I lined up in the book, all rock stars, all
Mm.
rock stars. And I talk about rock star leadership frequently when it comes to the different tips that people can engage to rise above just mediocre leadership, because we got a lot of it.
We're not mentioning any names. And we have some
Well,
horrific.
there's mediocre and then there's a
Yeah.
catastrophic failure, right? But we're not going to talk about anybody today. No, we're not going to do that.
Right.
But thank you so much, Dr. Jeff, not just for coming on this show, but also being a part of this book
Yes.
and the conversations that we've had in the past.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's have some more.
Yeah. We started having these conversations on the Culture Soup podcast.
Mm-hmm. I remember, of course.
Do you remember 4th of July?
Yes, absolutely.
2019.
Yes. I don't remember much anymore, but I remember that.
You do? That's great. But we talked about how privilege is as American as apple pie.
Yes.
But we also talked about all the different layers of it. And it's so important to have that context before we have this conversation. I keep turning it the wrong way. And I think people assume that we only talk about white privilege in the book. It is important to the book, but it's not the only kind of privilege.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From your perspective, talk to us about all the different kinds of privilege there are.
Well, there is a lot of privilege. And if you're not part of that privilege, it certainly can put you at a disadvantage. But the important thing, and I know what you've always talked about, is recognizing that there are people out there who are doing things that it's not because of their privilege. It's not about hating. It's not about putting them down. It's not about complaining about the advantages they have, but it's about learning about these different types of privilege. It's about infiltrating and going in and learning, for example, that if you go into a company as an intern, you're not necessarily making any money or very little money, but it does give you the privilege of getting that gig before someone who comes in on the outside. So you have to learn how to
Absolutely.
make privilege work for you. And of course, we talk about white privilege all the time. That's part of a systemic racism. But once again, if we know where it comes from, what it is, how we can begin to sidestep it in order to get the things that we need, in order to know how it works, so that we can learn the rules of the game and be able to navigate, then that's what makes us, puts us in a position to take advantage of that privilege and create our own privilege.
Yes. It's interesting. I first started to publicly talk about my position around the concept of privilege in 2019, and I started to speak at venues and actually bring it up. And at some point, I remember being on a panel and we were talking about building your tribe and leveraging your own privilege in order to speak up for other people. And a Latina woman stood up and had a question for me, and she said, "You know what? I am I'm confused because on the one hand, I know that I'm not privileged because I'm Latina, and I worked hard to get where I am today." She said, on the other hand, I know that I have more privilege than some of my brothers and sisters and some other people that I come into contact with. Is it possible to have privilege and not have privilege all
Mm.
at the same time?
That's right, and that's exactly what she's saying. Because quite often we talk about black and brown people. We always put the black before the brown. I like to
Mm-hmm.
put brown before the black because it allows us to be more inclusive. But we do know, for example, President Trump has a very strong support from some segments of the Hispanic
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
population. Those are the individuals who have privilege and don't want to lose their privilege. The privilege
Yeah.
may come from, what, a country they come from, which is considered to be, either a South American or Caribbean, or, a a Latinx based country. But we know that skin color has a lot to do with that. There's a privilege.
Yes.
But that's
Yes.
not to say that brown people who have light skin are, the enemy of the rest of the Latinx population or the Black population. Many of those people, whether they may vote for Trump or not, and many do not vote for Trump, I would say, most likely. Some do, a certain amount of the population do. But those are the individuals who say, hey, listen, I've got this privilege here,
Mm-hmm.
but you come with me and let's share this privilege. I'm going to open up a
Yeah.
few doors for you that would have never been opened. But I think what we're seeing with this situation with Trump is some people are afraid of losing that privilege, and they think they will lose it if this president is no longer there. So this privilege
Right.
thing is very real. Some people have it, some people don't, some people have it and don't have it. It allows
Yes.
to go only so far, but much further than many. So we've got to
Absolutely.
really be aware of what privilege is all about, but how we can make it work for everyone.
Absolutely. You and I talked about the kinds of privileges that you and I have. We have educational
Yes,
privilege.
yes, yes.
It's not to be taken lightly to be a scholar
Right,
and,
right.
and be
I,
able to
that's
get
right.
into rooms that other people cannot.
That's right. You have privilege as an author, entrepreneur, executive life coach. I have privilege as a psychologist, as a senior citizen. I can walk into rooms because of my age, because I'm in my 60s, and be able to talk with certain individuals and get respect from certain individuals that I wasn't able to do when I was in my 30s. They're like, who's this young upstart or whatever?
Yeah.
I don't see age as a negative thing. I see it as a thing of more of privilege, but privilege that's been earned, right?
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
I'm able to be on Fox TV and MSNBC, because I have the privilege of being a psychologist and, speaking from a psychological point of view. So that's the point that you're making. And people really need to understand, earn that privilege, find out about the privilege, be educated, and know what your
Yeah.
privilege is. Know what your privilege is and how you use that, how you monetize it, how you're able to utilize it in a way to open doors for you and for you to be able to reach your potential in a way that you perhaps would not be able to do without that privilege.
Right.
What is your privilege? Do some soul searching. What is your
Hmm.
privilege?
And again, it's not to demonize anyone. In fact,
Oh,
when I share about this book, the villain in the book is fear.
mm-hmm,
It's the one thing that holds all of us back when it comes down to what it is that I want to do, but I'm not doing it.
mm-hmm.
It's fear. And some of the fears are very real, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I'd like to touch on one more kind of privilege that confuses people, because you can have this privilege and not have another privilege, and that is financial privilege. And I'm thinking specifically about professional sports athletes, right?
Mm-hmm,
Professional athletes
mm-hmm,
who have the privilege of the money, the fame, the clout that comes along with being in the NFL or the NBA or whatever, NHL, whatever it might be.
mm-hmm.
At the same time, if you have the skin color that's darker and people identify you as black or brown, you can still be stopped by the police.
That's right. That's having
People
privilege,
don't get
not
that.
having privilege. But it brings up something that really is fascinating. Um, when you have that kind of privilege, when doors open for you everywhere, when you have the money, when you have the fame, but still are treated as if you don't have privilege when you're
Yeah.
when you're driving a car. What is the psychological toll and damage to that individual
Mm.
versus the one who perhaps never had the privilege and they expect that to happen? So it is shocking, shocking for that person who has the privilege. Now, of course, I would never say the one who has privilege and is stopped, their woes are larger than the person who may not have privilege and they're stopped often. I mean, trauma
Hmm.
is trauma, but we have to really be aware that brown and black people, no matter what their privilege is, or no matter the lack of privilege, are traumatized every day. And I'm
Yes.
trying not to speak in hyperbole, but in a way that the reality of being black and brown,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
So
and that you can't
go
rely
ahead.
on privilege. You can't rely on privilege alone. That
No.
will help you.
Yes.
It's important to know your privilege, but know that you can't skate on your privilege, whatever that is, whether it's education, whether it's money, whether anything that you think may give you that leg up.
Yeah. So this is a great way to tee up the conversation about the book. You show up in chapter 8, and there are 7 affirmations in the book. And the reason why we have affirmations is because if the villain in the book is fear, that means that we are dealing with tons of negative self-talk,
Mhm.
right? Saying, oh, you can't do that because that's scary. Or gee whiz, somebody might call you, hard to work with, or, an angry black woman, whatever it might be. That fear keeps us from moving forward. So the book literally is an executive coach in a book. And by that, I mean that while there is advice inside the book, coaches ask powerful questions to get you to think and to get through those blockages, accelerate your motion forward, give you clarity about it. So each one of the chapters has an affirmation. Well, most of the chapters do. There's 7 affirmations. That's what the 7 ways to say is all about. And this is the affirmations or the positive self-talk that you can do that will help you to overcome these negative aspects. So I want to say that this is the first time I've given away an affirmation live outside of the book. I haven't even posted one, right? So affirmation number 7 is, I will take positive cues from white privilege because I'm entitled. So now we're going to get really meta when we talk about privilege here, because we've talked about privilege as a way to open doors for some, if you are centered, right, in whatever space you might be in. But what we're talking about here is actually leveraging the positive aspects of what a lot of people see as negative, white privilege, which can be positive and negative. We found out in the book, there are all sorts of privileges in the book before we get to chapter 8. In fact, in chapter 2, I make the comment that I happened upon a pocket of Black privilege within a very white company. Mm-hmm. And my excellent performance got me an invitation to that dance, right?
Right.
The other thing is, one of the anecdotes that's in this very chapter talks about a positive aspect of white privilege. In fact, it came from a friend of ours who was a white male, still is, very, very senior individual, who overheard a conversation that about 3 African-American sisters, polished to the T, fine people, fine cars, fine clothes, what you will find in corporate America. After we came out of a diversity and inclusion conversation, having the meeting after the meeting, right? So all 3 of us are sitting there and we're like, girl, you know what? They really should have said X, Y, and Z. I can't even remember what we were saying, but I do remember this. I said, I couldn't say that in that meeting, because if I'd said that out loud, you know what they do to somebody like me? And we all said, like, yeah, girl, Mm-hmm. And this person, very high ranking person, walks up and says, why wouldn't you say it, Michelle? And we all stopped and looked at him. And he said, I'd say it, and let me tell you why. And this was something around racism and anti-Blackness. And he said, I would say it, and let me tell you why. What would they do but take my job? And this is the clincher. I'd just go get another one. And that's when it just shook me to my core. Why didn't I think like that? Why didn't all 3 of us think that way? We have credentials, we have educational privilege, right? We had corporate privilege, we were skilled, we could go anywhere, but something in our minds told us, no, you can't do that. It hit me in that moment that he had a degree of privilege because he didn't have to fear some of the things that we feared that are very, very real, that he did not see parents model a certain behavior. My parents, they worked through the 60s and the 70s, right? You kept your head down and you just worked. you didn't kick up dust about diversity and inclusion. And then it hit me. It was something positive that this man brought to the table that he wasn't even aware of. And we talked about it, you and I quote you in the book. I'm going to read it, okay? Yes. And then I want you to comment on it.
You got it.
I asked you you called it a provocative question on the Culture Soup podcast. And that was, what positives can people who are marginalized or on the outside of white privilege, what can we take that's positive from white privilege? And this is what you said. People can take and apply to themselves self-love, knowledge of self, an awareness of one's value, and the tendency to act boldly. And I took that and said, you know what? Those are positive affirmations that we could flip and use to our advantage. And this is where the idea of flipping privilege comes from. So, Dr. Jeff.
That's right. So let me rephrase that and say it in much more, even much more simple way, just for now. Though the way it's in the book is, I think it's just perfect, because you rounded out the edges on it too, let's be honest. But don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yes.
Not just don't hate the player, hate the game, but learn the rules of the game. Learn
There you
how to
go.
play it. See, so the whole thing about white privilege and, now thank God for Black Lives Matter is because we've started talking about white privilege as being part of institutional racism. How is it that, so many of these, corporations and institutions and different types of companies and so on, how is it that we see racism is expressed? Well, here it's what we call this unconscious racism. It's not
Hmm.
something that is intentional on their part, but it's something that has been with us for hundreds of years to the point where it's part of the bricks and mortar psychologically
Yes.
culture of not just our society, but the byproduct of society, the institutions, the companies, and so on. So it's not about, pointing fingers, you bad people. It's about getting them to recognize that there is white privilege, that having a skin color or identifying as a white person or, something similar, um, they are able to be let into a club much easier than the rest of us.
Yeah.
And it's not done intentionally. Again, it's part of stereotypical thinking. It's part of, an upbringing where we feel good about something because it's around us all the time, right?
And you know what?
So we
This is
have
what.
to,
Mhm.
well, let me just say very quickly. And so
Okay.
we have to learn, you know, how that happens. And therefore, how do we infiltrate that system? How do we find out what it is that they like? How, once we get in, do we begin to change that culture and open the door for others who look like
Yes.
us to come in and change that culture? And so
Yes.
we have a lot of friends who have white privilege. Let's
Yes.
not turn them off. Let's get them to recognize what it is that they have. Let's get them to recognize that they may not want to look at white privilege because of white fragility, right?
Yes.
But that we
Right.
support them in their journey to learn about themselves. And we don't ask for much in return, only equality, only
Yeah.
opportunity, only to open the door and allow us to come in and do our work.
Absolutely. I love what you said there. And I think it draws attention to the power of that anecdote. Because what we saw that very powerful white man do was, you know, posit that he would use his privilege to speak up for someone who was underprivileged. Number one, that was a good thing. But I think what was behind it may not have even been conscious to him, like it wasn't conscious to us. But it did raise the question, why did he go from they could fire me, but I'll go get a job? And we sat there and said, they could fire me, period.
Well, because he doesn't have many of the traumatic experiences with regard to race that we have had. And so those
Yes.
traumatic experiences result in what I call very much a systemic post traumatic stress disorder that is
Mm-hmm.
specific to people of color, to brown and black people. Some people call it post traumatic slavery disorder, and there are
Mm.
variations on that. And so, what we're talking about is a mental health challenge that keeps us, if we're not aware of it, from being able to look at all of the different possibilities.
Yeah.
In many ways, has imposed a fear on our thinking that keeps us from, taking the risks and taking the chances. Now, we see with people like you, Michelle, and with certainly our younger generation of brown and black people, they're kicking all of that stuff in the butt and they're saying, you know what, we are going to achieve, we can see the horizons, we are going to live to our potential, and we're going to dream, and we're going to live out our dreams. Why is that
Yeah.
happening? There's more courage in this particular
Yes.
generation. They may have not had the trauma that dinosaurs like myself have had living in
You
the
are not a dinosaur.
living in the 50s, living in the 60s, Civil Rights Act and so on, seeing segregation and all those sorts of things. But that's a good thing because it
Yeah.
gives this generation not only the strength to be better entrepreneurs and business people, Michelle, but it also allows them to be the people who are in the streets peacefully protesting,
Yes.
demonstrating for equality and in the boardroom, the C-suite, and certainly in everyday life.
Absolutely. So it is fascinating that these qualities that we saw in this one anecdote and even in white men in general, we can adopt, even if we have to manufacture it, right? Whether it's through our tribe that pours it into us, whether it's the self-talk that we do,
Mm-hmm.
we have to understand that we are entitled.
That's
And I think that's the thing that scares people when you walk in that entitlement into a room where you're not centered. It causes people to go, wait a minute.
Listen, here's the thing. What you've done is really brilliant. I need people to really understand, and they can read the book, Getting No Thanks, and understand this, that yes, we deplore white privilege. We know that it's held us back for so long. But what Michelle is saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, is go into the thinking of individuals who live in a society where they get white privilege. And with that white privilege, they have a psychological freedom that quite often we don't tap into.
Yes.
Study that freedom. See what it's like to live without some of that fear. Feel what it's like to be able to take risks and not, be in a situation of, oh my God, but how am I going to pay my bills? Because
Yeah.
people with white privilege, they really begin, even if they do get themselves in trouble because they may not get another gig, but they are thinking in a way that they have no shackles or bounds.
Yeah.
So we need to be careful with that too, and not lose our minds and exactly what they may do, but there are
Right.
nuggets, there are techniques, there are things that we can learn. Don't hate the player, hate the
Hate
game,
the game.
learn the
And
rules.
you know what? Learn from the game.
Right.
Yes.
And play on, player.
Play on, player. You know what, Dr. Jeff? There's one more aspect to this that I don't think a lot of people think about. I liken privilege, whatever kind of privilege, as the centering of some body or some group. And if they're centered, it means the rest of us are on the outside and we're all the way around them, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is where it gets tricky. Sometimes we play into that power center because we've been accustomed to it, because of generational trauma, because of all of these things, right? It's subconscious. So it is very true that you can find people who look just like me, brown, female, who will work to tear another one of us down because they don't see the value in themselves, let alone the value in you. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, very much. There are individuals who are very much involved in what we call projection. And if they're not feeling good about themselves, they have a false bravado. They've created a privilege which is not real,
Real, right?
but very flimsy. And that used to happen quite often. Then we see, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. But a lot of that privilege that they claim to have, that they claim to use, that they feel that they're creating, um, they tear other people down, as Michelle is saying, because none of it is real. By tearing you down, they feel it feeds into their own ego, their own
Yeah.
privilege that they can do that. Where do we see that? We see it every day. We see it in
Yeah.
politics, right?
Yeah.
In corporations. We're seeing it in an election coming up.
Yeah.
Don't get me started. I didn't want to go.
Yeah. Look, You know, um, and I've done a lot of looking into Black history as well here in the United States, and some of these caricatures play out on the plantation. You have to go all the way back to see it. I
Mm-hmm.
typically call this character, no matter if they are Black, if they are Latina, no matter if they're Asian, they're the overseer.
Mm-hmm.
They feel that they have some kind of power to wield over people who look like them. This is Karen too, to be honest. Women do this to women all the time.
Yes, and
Karen,
and my previous example was more what happens when someone of another culture or race does that to someone of a different culture or race. But you're right. I mean, we do this. I don't know why you want to go there today. I don't
hey, it's in the book.
go there today. But yes, there are people who look like us who, in many ways, have a false sense of that privilege and wield it like a sword against people who look like them. Now, I'll
Mhm.
show you. I'll give you a typical example of that. The sole Black person working in a company who makes sure that they're the sole Black person working in a company. And I'm not
There you
talking
go.
SOUL. I'm talking about SOLE. Okay,
Yes.
that's where we see that. We talk about the crabs, crabs in a
Crabs
barrel,
in a barrel.
So, we, in many ways, that can be our biggest enemy because we thought that this is a person who can be our biggest ally. So, but here's the interesting thing. Sometimes we do that as people of color and are not even aware of it. And so
That's what I'm talking about.
we have to do our soul searching and not be afraid of sharing,
Yeah.
giving up
Listen, you know what?
to bring.
Core to my platform is
Right.
authenticity, and authenticity is very important to real rock star leadership.
That's right.
And the fact that I can admit that I have gone into rooms before and assumed somebody was in charge, not even consciously, but
Mm-hmm.
it had more to do with who that person was, and it may have had something to do with race too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's been done to me, and then I have to snap myself out of it and say, wait a minute, what am I doing? That woman could be in charge.
Well, and that's part of implicit bias that we do have. And it's important that we all pay attention to it, not just for society's sake, but when we're involved in business, when we're involved in industry, implicit bias can really destroy your work if you're not aware. And if you're able to look at what that implicit bias is and work on that each and every day, that only makes you that superstar, that rock star that you talk about, because you have less of the psychological shackles that keep you in a place where you're not able to not only look at your potential, but realize the potential of someone else who can be part of your team.
Yeah. Wow. If we could wrap our heads around this, what kind of forward movement might we make?
That's right. That's right. Look, I mean, we're out there. Black Lives Matter. The movements are out there. We're changing the world. We're changing society. We're changing the industry, but we've got to have a plan.
Yeah.
Got to have a plan. And Michelle, you've offered a plan. And that plan is to be able to study what it is that certain people who may have privilege, how is that wielded? How does it come about? But what are the things that they think? How do they operate? Who are they? And how can we use that knowledge in order to be able to break that glass ceiling, the secret knowledge, make it not so
Yeah.
secret, and to allow others who are Black and Brown and LGBT and all other communities
Accessibility.
to be able to come through the door, because the answer is love and diversity.
Yes. Love. It all starts with love. It
Mm-hmm.
ends with love.
Mm-hmm.
All of it. You know what, Dr. Jeff, before I let you go, because this has been a great conversation, I'm so glad we had it.
Always a
I got to ask you, what questions do you have for me about this book?
well, how I think the most important thing is, how do we get no thanks out to everyone in a way that they can begin recommending it to everyone else. There is some great, professional and life coaching out there. How can I help you do that? I'm happy to do that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Dr. Jeff, if you notice or you know that there are people out there that this would be great for, if you would recommend it or buy it as a gift, we're coming up on the holidays. It's a great gift. And if you get it from my website, nothanksbooks.com, I'll sign it and ship it out to you. Otherwise, you can go to amazon.com, there's barnesandnoble.com, hudsonbooksellers.com. If you're in Canada, Chapters Indigo, and of course, add whatever extension on to Amazon. If you're in Japan, if you're in Canada, wherever you might be, you can get it online. But I recommend, and I'm seeing it happen, the sisters that are getting this book, Black, white, Latino, whatever, they're buying more than one. They're buying them in bulk. And they're saying, my reading group needs this. My reading circle needs this. My mentoring circle needs this. And I appreciate that because my goal isn't New York Times bestseller. My goal is to see more women of color crashing the C-suite.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what? This is a book that I think really can change the paradigm, change the game in the way that we are playing it. So get those secrets.
I appreciate that. Y'all heard it first from America's Psychologist. It's Dr. Jeff Gardere, clinical psychologist, and you've seen him on television everywhere. And most importantly, he's my friend. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeff.
I'm happy to be your friend.
I'm so glad you are my friend.
Amazing. I have so many powerful friends like you. Majority, 99% of them are women. I am the biggest guy in the world. And these are true friends. And these are people that I learned so much from because women are the most powerful force on this planet.
Oh, wow. You know what? If more men understood that.
If more men understood that, they'd be much happier in their relationships.
I think so too.
And in their lives. Trust me.
Yeah, if we could get out of the mindset of power, and who has the power, I think that's where people get really messed up about things, So I appreciate that high praise. And you know what, Dr. Jeff? Perhaps we need to do some media together. That would be great because I think more people need to hear this.
And we have done some and we'll do more.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody, Dr. Jeff Gardere, tell them where they can follow you on social media.
At Dr. Jeff Gardere on Twitter. They can go to drjeffgardere.com and certainly you'll find me somewhere. I'm everywhere,
He's also on LinkedIn, Dr. Jeff Gardere. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And this will air on Thursday tonight on the Culture Soup podcast. I'm going to rip this audio and get it up right away. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.